What's up, guys? Dom here with Restricted America. Just got a new webcam, also a different microphone, so I'm hoping that this video is a little bit higher quality. If it is, just let me know in the comments. It's not that important, but today I'm talking about the Donnell versus the Commonwealth case, and why it could be, the outcome of it could be a great thing for, not just Massachusetts, but, the whole country. So if you guys don't know what the Donnell case actually is about, I have an article that I was going to read, and it actually is from when it was granted a positive ruling from a judge in Massachusetts, and this is from the Reload and by Jake Fogelman, and it's labeled as Massachusetts Judge Rules Law Against Carrying Guns Across State Lines Unconstitutional. So the article goes as follows. A person's right to carry a firearm in public for self-defense does not end at state lines. A Massachusetts trial judge has ruled. Earlier this month, Lowell District Court Judge John F. Coffey dismissed a criminal case against a New Hampshire man charged with carrying a firearm without a license in Massachusetts. He found the state's requirement that non-residents obtain a temporary license to carry in Massachusetts violates the Second Amendment. An individual only loses a constitutional right if he commits an offense or has been engaged in certain behavior that is covered by 18 U.S.C. Section 922. Judge Coffey wrote on August 3rd in Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Dean F. Donnell, he doesn't lose that right simply by traveling into an adjoining state whose statute mandates that residents of that state obtain a license prior to exercising their constitutional right. Told otherwise would inexplicably treat Second Amendment rights differently than other individually held rights. Therefore, the court finds that GL 269 Section 10A is unconstitutional as applied to this particularly situated defendant and allows the motion to dismiss on that ground. The ruling could have significant implications for determining the scope of the right to carry a firearm in public. It is one of the first legal decisions to address gun carry rights across state lines since the Supreme Court recognized a general public carry right in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin last June. It could fuel gun rights advocates' push for the right to travel in all 50 states with firearms in public, also known as national reciprocity. The defendant in this case, Dean Donnell, is a legal resident of New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a permitless gun carry state, meaning anyone 18 years of age or older who can legally possess a firearm may carry it in public, openly, or concealed. It also issues carry permits to residents for reciprocity purposes. However, Massachusetts does not honor New Hampshire permits. Judge Coffey's order does not specify whether or not Donell had a valid New Hampshire permit, only that he was in compliance with his home state's laws on the possession of the firearm when Massachusetts charged him. The law under which he was charged, GL 269 Section 10A, creates a mandatory minimum sentence of 18 months in prison for anyone convicted of possessing a firearm in public without a license. Mandatory minimum sentence of 18 months. That is a lot. Judge Coffey wrote that Donnell's conduct was clearly covered by the Second Amendment, therefore under the standard of review set in Bruin. He said the government of Massachusetts needed to show a historical tradition relating to disparate treatment of non-residents to uphold the law. Rather than point to any historical analogs, the Massachusetts government argued that previous state court decisions had held that it was not required to recognize the gun carry rights of non-residents. Judge Coffey dismissed those arguments because the cited state court precedents relied on a time when Massachusetts issued permits on a subjective may-issue standard struck down the Supreme Court in Bruin. The argument is not persuasive because at the time of the Harris decision, carrying a firearm outside of the home was a privilege, and the Harris court held that Massachusetts didn't have to give full faith and credit to New Hampshire laws conferring that same privilege. He wrote, "The Commonwealth points to no historical precedent limiting the reach of one's exercise to a federal constitutional right to only within that resident state's borders." The government also argued that its law was constitutional because it allowed non-residents to obtain a special temporary permit to carry firearms when visiting the state. They cited Justice Brett Kavanaugh's concurring opinion in Bruin clarifying that objective gun permitting systems were permissible as support. Judge Coffey disagreed that the state's non-resident permitting system was constitutionally sound because it sets different standards for non-resident applicants than resident applicants. And to go back to that, they said that they cited Justice Brett Kavanaugh's concurring opinion. We kind of knew that would be an issue with these anti-gun decisions. We kind of knew they were going to cite that. We still don't know why Justice Kavanaugh did that and said that they may be constitutional. It's still, I don't know. As stated above, prior to the Bruen decision, Massachusetts treated the carrying of a firearm as a privilege, he wrote. While it allowed non-residents to apply to obtain a license for that privilege, non-residents were not treated the same as residents. Residents of Massachusetts obtaining a license were granted the license for 5 years. A temporary non-resident license was only valid for 1 year. As a result, Coffey held that the state failed to meet its burden in proving that Donnell's conduct was not constitutionally protected and warranted a felony charge. This court can think of no other constitutional right which a person loses simply by traveling beyond his home state border into another state, continuing to exercise that right, and instantaneously becoming a felon subject to mandatory minimum sentence of incarceration, Coffey added. Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Joy Campbell D. did not respond to requests for comment about the decision. And just to reiterate, this was from almost I think it was actually a year ago today. It was August 22nd, 2023, that this article was written. So obviously this is old, but I just want you to have kind of a preliminary understanding of the Donell case, because I know a lot of people probably don't really understand. Like, they kind of understand a little bit, but this kind of gives a little bit more in-depth review of it. I know it was kind of a longer article than I thought, but it's, again, if you want to see that, I'll try to link it in the description of this video. It's by The Reload, and it is by Jake Fogelman. So the judge ruled that this was unconstitutional in this specific person's case, so it doesn't apply to everybody. But what we can take from this, basically what what Massachusetts did was they appealed it, so now it's going to the Massachusetts Supreme Court, and you've had a lot of big organizations filing amicus briefs and supporting Dean Donnell, financially and, through their, words. But one of the standouts that I would say is actually, and I made a video about this before, but this, I'm going to read an article that's a little bit different, gives a little bit of a different angle. New Hampshire filed an amicus brief, supporting Dean Donnell, because he is a resident of New Hampshire, and, it makes sense, obviously, for a state that's more conservative, pro-gun, like New Hampshire, to protect its citizens from anti-gun states like Massachusetts, especially for someone who didn't even, really do any harm to anyone. They're just committing a crime, which, again, I don't think it's a crime, but, again, Massachusetts does, so that's the issue. I'm not going to read this whole article because it's very long, but this is from the Washington Times. It's by Alex Sawyer, I think. If I'm getting that name wrong, I apologize. And it's labeled as Massachusetts and New Hampshire exchange fire over gun control measures. Dispute over right to travel with firearms likely to end up before Supreme Court, legal experts say. Massachusetts and New Hampshire are embroiled in a gun dispute that could extend beyond New England and eventually involve the U.S. Supreme Court. The issue is the right to travel with guns between states with different firearm regulations. Massachusetts' highest appeals court is considering the case of a New Hampshire man who had traveled to the state with his firearm without a license from the Commonwealth. And in the gun owner's defense, New Hampshire is calling for Massachusetts to end its strict licensing law for visitors. States have wrestled with firearm restrictions in the 2 years since the Supreme Court ruled in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, Inc. versus Bruen that gun control laws must be consistent with the history and traditions at the nation's founding to be constitutional. The issue of the right to travel with firearms will likely come before the Supreme Court, which has ruled on other gun control cases since its landmark 2022 ruling in Bruen, said, I think that's Ilya Shapiro, Director of Constitutional Studies at the Manhattan Institute. It is definitely something that has been litigated and will continue to be litigated, Mr. Shapiro said. The clash between New Hampshire and Massachusetts has garnered attention from pro-gun groups like the Second Amendment Foundation and the National Rifle Association, which filed a brief this month in support of the New Hampshire man fighting the Commonwealth's charges as the case pens before the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court during its 2024 session. The pro-gun organizations argue that there is no historical tradition of a state licensing scheme for non-residents. Historically, non-residents traveling in a state were treated no worse than residents with regard to firearm carry. If they were treated differently under the law, it was generally to exempt travelers from carry restrictions, not to subject them to more onerous burdens than residents, their filing read. New Hampshire resident Dean F. Donnell traveled to Massachusetts in 2021 with a firearm in Massachusetts, which requires gun owners to acquire a temporary permit when visiting the Commonwealth, charged Mr. Donnell with a felony for violating the law. Lowell District Court Judge John Coffey dismissed this case in 2023, saying that requiring non-residents to obtain licenses to carry firearms violates the Second Amendment because there is no historical analog burdening the right to interstate travel. Judge Coffey cited the Bruin decision in his ruling. And it just goes on to more of the specifics, but I just kind of wanted to read as much as I could without boring all of you. But yeah, they basically are citing the Bruin decision and how some people, experts are thinking that this is going to end up in the, United States Supreme Court and not just the Mass Supreme Court, because the Massachusetts Supreme Court and the First District of Court of Appeals are both very liberal, anti-gun. It's the worst. It's the worst area for gun laws and trying to appeal gun laws. It's not friendly towards gun owners at all. So basically, a lot of people are thinking that this is going to end up in the, U.S. Supreme Court. I personally think it is. I do think there's a small chance that the Mass Supreme Court rules favorably in this. And I know a lot of you are going to disagree with me in that, but I think they might try to save themselves from this becoming a Supreme Court issue. If it gets to, the U.S. Supreme Court, it's going to be ruled favorably for the gun owner, for Donell. And if that's the case, then every state has to reciprocate for gun licenses, and basically anything like what Massachusetts is trying to do now with forcing gun laws on people from different states that live in different states that are just visiting, it's not going to work anymore. So I think if they were smart, the Mass Supreme Court would rule favorably for Donell in this case. You could say, a case like this may eventually get to the Supreme Court regardless, but I think, if these judges were actually, thinking big picture, they would contain it to just Massachusetts. So honestly, I personally think they will get a favorable ruling. But again, I'm no legal expert. This is just my thoughts on this. It doesn't really affect, the new Massachusetts gun bill 4885, now known as Chapter 135, really that much. But any gun law that's struck down in Massachusetts is a good thing and a win. So guys, I got some collaborations in the works. I'm trying to work out some things with other YouTube channels and in Gun Owners Action League, so I'll announce those when they are ready. But guys, thanks for watching. I know sometimes I go off on a tangent, but I do appreciate everyone that watches and supports this channel. If you enjoyed these types of videos, make sure to give it a like. Make sure to leave a comment and share the video if you know anyone in Massachusetts or really around the country that's interested in this kind of gun rights or guns and ammo videos. I try to put out a lot of these. So again, share it if you can. And make sure if you're not subscribed to do that now. A lot of you guys that watch the videos aren't actually subscribed. So if you can do that, that'd be awesome. And other than that, guys, stay informed and stay unrestricted.